Hey everybody, you are listening to Grace Bond Ministries. Grace Bond Ministries is about sharing the Word of God, having conversations about difficult topics, talking about apologetics, coming together, tackling issues, answering questions, studying the Scripture, doing devotionals. Listen, Grace Bond Ministries has so many different things that we're going to talk about, that we have talked about, we're going to continue talking about, and this podcast is made for someone who wants to know more about the Christian faith, or wants answers to their questions, or just wants to ask questions, or just wants a safe place to talk about things, even things like politics, abortion, homosexuality, hell, or just how do I have strong faith? That's what you're going to get when you listen to Grace Bond Ministries. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you are blessed and encouraged by what we do here.
Hey everybody, just want to start off by saying I hate this topic. See, I did it, Christian. So listen, me and Christian and I, we are in a politics series, and we are tackling the most hot button issues that we know that kind of relate to the political realm. And this time we are talking about abortion. And as we all know, abortion is a very hot topic, and there's a lot of not just differing opinions on this topic, but aggressive and emotional opinions and emotional thoughts, and there's just a lot to discuss and unpack and finalize and really just talk about. And so that's what we're going to be working on in this podcast, and we're going to walk you through some things, and hopefully we can address some concerns and talk about some of the legislation that's coming up on the November 2024 ballots in 7 to 8 states right now. So we'll talk about that some more here on the podcast, but we will see you on the podcast. So stay tuned.
For it is by grace you are saved through faith, not of yourselves, but it is a gift of God. Ephesians 2:8. Welcome to Grace Bond Ministries.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Grace Bond Ministries. Like you heard in the intro, we're talking about the political, topic of abortion. All right, and man, what a sensitive topic. There is so much emotion that goes into this, and I don't know about your experiences, Christian, but the people I've talked to about abortion, it's like in the same conversation, I'm going to hear intellectual arguments, scientific arguments, I guess, but I'm also going to hear very strong emotional arguments, usually in the same conversation, because anybody who's a good debater knows that if you're trying to convince people of something, that emotional arguments are usually going to be your strong suit, I guess. So I don't know, Christian, what have your experiences been about the same?
Yeah, I think especially on this topic, emotions will take over. And so different people have had different experiences with this. I mean, we've got movies based on it. It's happening in TV shows. Like it's all around us. It's not something you can really avoid talking about. And so I think I heard some statistic about the 1 in every something number of people have had an abortion. I remember it was pretty shocking to know how many. So even the people we talked to could have had it and just won't. And that's where their emotion comes from. Or one of their family members had one.
Yeah.
That's definitely a very heavy topic.
Yeah, and when we so here's the plan of how we want to talk about this today. We're obviously we're running a Christian podcast, so we're Christians. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And because of our Christian worldview, there are some ways that we see things that are pretty standard, for somebody that's a Christian. But what we want to do, we want to show that, this is not just a this isn't just a theological belief. This is science. This is a little bit of philosophy. This is there's some things that we can talk about uh, that are important, I think, to this discussion. Um, anyways, let me just jump into it. Uh, there's basically two views that have kind of been put forward, and very broad, I guess, very broad views. Although pro-choice people who believe, well, let me explain what they are first. So usually people are grouped into one of two categories. You're either pro-choice or you're pro-life, is typically the categories people go with. And so a definition I wrote up for pro-choice is that women should have, like, people who believe in pro-choice say women should have the right to make their own choices about whether or not to continue or terminate a pregnancy after conception. And then there's all kinds of debates about how long after conception can an abortion happen, or should an abortion happen? I mean, should it happen within the first month? Should it happen within the first 3 months? Can it happen all the way up to birth? You'll see the word viability, which we'll talk about here in just a second, because can it happen up till the viability of the fetus? So that's kind of I think it's pretty broad. It's a pretty broad stroke when somebody considers themselves pro-choice, because there are people that would consider themselves pro-life. I mean, I don't know that anybody would say I hate life, and I hope people die. So I don't know that there's any pro-choice people that are going to say I hate life. It's just kind of, we'll get into it some more in a minute, but that's kind of a broad stroke of what they believe. Planned Parenthood, which is a very known, liberal and very pro-choice group, which they even said they don't even use the term pro-choice or pro-life, but they said generally people who identified as pro-choice, they put that in quotes, believe that people have the right to control their own bodies, and everyone should be able to decide when and whether to have children. All right, so we're not going to really debate that yet. We just want to explain what the two views are. So pro-life would be. I like how Planned Parenthood puts it. This is kind of ironic to me, but Planned Parenthood said people who want abortion, people who are pro-life, or people who want abortion to be illegal and inaccessible are often called pro-life. But something I kind of came up with is that pro-life people believe that the baby or fetus should have the same rights as other persons, since the baby or fetus meets criteria for personhood. Pro-life because they're called pro-life because they fight for protecting the lives of what they deem to be human beings, specifically innocent and helpless human beings. So obviously, I'm pro-life, and I'll explain why, as we do this podcast. But I think that's probably a good way to word it. Maybe a little bit more detailed than the other one, so maybe I didn't get pro-choice enough credit. But like I said, there's people who kind of cross both of these spectrums, because and we'll talk about it some more in a minute. But like some people will say, well, I'm pro-life, like personally, but I don't feel like I have the right to tell somebody else whether or not to be pro-life or pro-choice. Whether or not to make their own choice, whether it should somebody actually have the right to make the choice, to make their own free choice about whether or not they want to have an abortion or not. And so I've met a lot of people. That believe that wouldn't have an abortion themselves, but also don't want to take the right away from the person. So they kind of get thrown into either or category, as they talk about it. But so yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Those are the two views. Christian, was there anything there I missed that you can think of?
No, I think you've got the views pretty down pat, and I guess I would say it's hard to ride exactly the middle. I don't know if there's an exact middle line. Now, I think there's people leaning, but I don't think there's an exact middle line. And some people may say they're pro-life, but it may be pro-life. But then there's certain circumstances where they're based on choice, and so those lines tend to cross.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. So we just want to dive straight into this And we're going to start with the pro-choice arguments, all right? Because we want, not only do we want to defend pro-life, but we also want to show that, hey, we understand, we hear and understand the arguments from the pro-choice side. And like I told Christian many times before we actually started recording, and he said the same thing. It's just, we hate this topic. It's upsetting and troubling to me that we even have to, that we're even there's this is even debatable. It's just crazy to me. And I'm going to share some things from an article from Planned Parenthood that I found. It's a testimony of abortion, but this is on Planned Parenthood as something that they say is a story that should help support abortion. But we'll get to it in just a minute. But so we're going to get into some of these pro-choice arguments. So Christian, if you want to, man, kick us off. What are some of the arguments that people make for giving women the right and protecting their rights to make their own choice whether or not to have an abortion, rather than tell a government agency or government law commanding them whether or not they are allowed to or not?
Yeah, I think it's the first one that we're going to see basically throughout the amendments that are going to be on the ballot is the word viability. And this is a word, if you look throughout the history, has kind of changed on what they count as viable. And especially in the update of technology and medically, the word viable is going to change. And so it's hard to put that into place and say that that is the definition. Which, looking at viability, it's when infants are still considered fully dependent on their parents. So is this fetus able to survive on its own? They want to be able to take the baby out and the baby be able to survive with no medical attention. And so looking throughout history, it was probably a lot later in the pregnancy that the baby was viable, in their opinion, because they don't see personhood until the baby is viable, until he's able to survive on their own. And I mean, even looking at infants, you look at people who are elderly, surviving on your own is on a whole different spectrum. And I was just looking it up earlier. The earliest baby known to survive is Curtis Zy Keith, who was born in the U.S. 21 weeks and 1 day. So 21 weeks would put you about halfway through, or right at the end of the second trimester. And so is that right? Yes. No. 4 times, Yeah, right before this end of the second trimester. And so we can see that's still pretty early on. And a lot of these abortions, and you'll see it in the amendments, are say based on viability, but there's a different arguments that would push this to even be close to pregnancy. But that's probably one of their main key arguments that they put forward. And then you have whether they're rational beings, whether they can know what they're doing or know what's going on. And so this is another one that the babies probably know a lot more than you think they do. And for infants, toddlers, I mean, they know what's going on, but they don't fully understand. And then you've got dementia patients, so this argument kind of goes across the board. Another one is having the ability to feel, as in the 5 senses. And so, taste, smell, touch, that's 3. Taste, smell, touch. Dang, do I know my 5 senses? Hear.
Well, you're sick right now. He's got COVID right now, so he's not. He may not have all 5 of his senses. So,
yeah, my senses may be dampened too. So,
yeah, was it hear, smell, touch, taste?
Yeah. So,
That's it.
Touch,
feel,
taste, hear, smell, feel. Yeah.
Who would have thought this would be the hardest thing we talk about on the entire podcast? The 5 senses. If only we had some kind of system that we could just get in and get an answer.
Exactly. But yeah, the baby must have the ability for all of those. they make a argument about comparing this to the mother choosing whether to give the child a liver if they need it, and then they go into what happens if we make abortions illegal or we start making it illegal in certain states. So are people going to try to do it on their own where it's not safe or anything like that? What else we got? So they bring up these circumstances that are not as plentiful, and we want to make laws based off of them. But when the women are at risk of death, and they said the husband should really have no part in whether to have the abortion or not. And then cases of rape, and then they go into the stats of whether abortion should happen. And we look at it, and it says mostly because of readiness and circumstance and not because of health or rape. So the majority is based off of what they feel is best for them at that point in time. And if the fetus is not a person like they believe, then of course they're going to think about themselves. But I think we can prove through the development of the fetus that it indeed has personhood, that it is viable, especially from conception it's a person, and the viability is much earlier on than we suspect. So I think those are most of the pro-choice arguments that we have. Do you have anything else you had thought of, Jonathan?
Yeah, and I mean, going back to like the viability thing, I mean, we're gonna talk about it some more, but like this is how the term would be used in a law. So this is actually something they're gonna put on the ballot in Florida in the November 2024 ballot. It says, except as provided in Article 10, Section 22, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's health care provider. So viability, like this website we're going to talk about in a minute, says that viability can be kind of ambiguous. And so if they say viability, then it's going to, there could be arguments and cases of, well, the baby was not viable yet, or the baby was viable. And so it's still kind of ambiguous. So it's kind of a dangerous term just to use in a law you're trying to set in stone. So it's obviously it's a ploy. It's a ploy to try to trick people. But I just wanted to read this. So this is on I don't know how to pronounce it, but guttmacher.org. It's kind of a liberal website. They're definitely pro-choice leaning, but they did a survey on why women have abortions. They said that the results of this survey, it says the reasons most frequently cited were that having a child would interfere with a woman's education, work, or ability to care for dependents, 74%, that she could not afford a baby now, 73%, and that she did not want to be a single mother or was having relationship problems, 48%. Nearly 4 in 10 women said they had completed their childbearing, and almost 1/3 were not ready to have a child. Fewer than 1% said their parents' or partner's desire for them to have an abortion was the most important reason. Younger women often reported that they were unprepared for the transition to motherhood, while older women regularly cited their responsibility to dependents. And so you can see right there, if somebody starts throwing out these wild, like some of these wild pro-choice arguments, and it's like, well, you're going to make somebody who got raped or somebody that is found in a case of incest, you're going to make them go through with the pregnancy by law, even though it could be dangerous for the woman. It could be emotionally destructive. I mean, we could talk about the emotional impact and mental impact that it can have on if a woman gets raped and it becomes pregnant and has to go through that abortion. I can't really imagine it. I guess you always got to be careful to say that you understand or you could imagine, but I could definitely see how that could be extremely difficult for somebody to go through. And so we also got to keep in mind that these are very minimal things. and I shouldn't say that, not minimal like that, but like very low statistically, that there's a very low chance that that's going to be the case. So when we're talking about pro life, we're talking more and focusing more on the mass, where it just said 74, was it 74 or 78% of these abortions, 74% were because of work or just for some reason other than some kind of medical issue, or some kind of or a case of rape or incest or something like that. So that's one thing. And really, and what Christian was kind of getting at with all this is the arguments are trying to the arguments from both sides. I think the most important parts of this debate going back and forth is on personhood. What determines whether or not someone is a person, right? So if somebody is viable, like Christian said, if a fetus is viable, okay, well, if a fetus is not, let's say the fetus is not viable, a fetus cannot function on its own apart from the mother. Okay, well, what about an elderly person, like Christian mentioned? Just kind of stretching out that thought a little bit more. You could run into viability issues with an elderly. You're like, well, this person can't function on their own anymore. Therefore, what? We're supposed to murder them? So there's some definitely some issues with that, and the fact that they have to be rational beings. Well, good Lord, I know adults that aren't rational beings. So, but I know what you mean. I know that was definitely a fallacy of some sort I just did. But they have to know what they're doing, what is going on. But I mean, even newborn babies don't really know what they're doing and what's going on. So it just seems like a weak argument. Having the ability to have senses, I mean, is that how we're going to determine what personhood is? And so kind of the argument, I guess we'll get into it here in just a second, but let me get into a couple more of the things I've heard. The thing he was saying about the liver thing, right? So I had somebody I was talking to, and they said, we were going back and forth about abortion, and she said, if, let's say I had a kid, my kid was 7 years old, and my kid's liver was failing, and I needed to give this kid my liver in order for them to survive. But if I gave them my liver, it would kill me. Would it be okay for the law to mandate that I gave my kid my liver? And I'm like, wow, thank you for coming up with a nearly impossible circumstance that'll probably, if it does happen, it'll be a very rare experience. But here's the thing, here's the difference between that and an abortion is what is actively, not passively, what is actively killing the baby, the kid. So in the case of the liver failure, it's the liver failure that is actively killing the kid. And obviously, I mean, I'm a parent, and if I would give my life for my kid. So, it wouldn't even be a second guess to me. So, but I understand what they're trying to do. What she was trying to do is she was trying to kind of stump me and push me into a corner. But it's really about what is actively killing. Because in an abortion, it's the person who decides they want to do it, and then it's also the doctor who does it with their own hands. That's who's actively committing the murder in that sense. And that's the thing is, like, a lot of these pro-choice arguments come back down to that they do not believe that personhood starts until after birth. And then sometimes some of these states like New York was talking about even having abortions, quote unquote. What was, I don't remember what the months were, like 6 months after a baby was born. And, I mean, that's just nuts. And so that's where it really comes down to is when does a fetus, when does a person become a person? And so we'll talk about it when we get to some of the more pro-life arguments. A person becomes a person when at conception is the argument that we're going to make. And I think it's an argument that we can defend pretty well theologically, scientifically, and philosophically. So I think we've got the triple whammy there. I do have a couple of other things. So these are some posts. There's like a National Organization for Women. It said, keep your theology out of my biology. So that's one of the reasons that we're not just talking about theology today. We're talking about science and philosophy. Philosophy, because we have to piece all this evidence together and figure out what determines personhood of a person. What are the characteristics of personhood? So that's where philosophy comes in. Another one said, I'm with my partner as he gets his vasectomy, and I can't help but notice no protesters, no one trying to get him to change his mind, no unnecessary medical scans, no 48-hour waiting period. It's like they trust him to make his own medical decisions. Okay, so that's another pro-choice argument. And obviously the issue there, if you haven't caught on, is his own medical decisions. That's where they lost me. Because I don't believe that when you're talking about actively killing something that is already conceived, you're no longer making a medical decision, you're making a moral decision. And so that was another one I've seen. There was one more. Let me see if I can find it. There was one more I had, but here it is. It says, and I believe this was from the, what's that page called? It doesn't matter, but it was a million for women or something like that, women's rights. It was a women's rights page, but it said pro-choice doesn't mean I love abortion. It means I don't tell other people what to do when they are in a situation I may never understand myself. And me and Christian both would reiterate this time and time again, is no, we don't understand what it's like to go through pregnancy. I mean, I was with my wife the whole time she was pregnant. I know that it would have never crossed her mind to have an abortion because this story I'll read in just a minute from the Planned Parenthood website, like you feel it, man. Like when you're pregnant and you've got a kid and that reality actually hits you that I've got a live human being living inside of me. Like I've known people that have had miscarriages and stuff, and I would not ever tell them that baby that was inside of them, the baby they lost, was not actually a human being. And if it was a human being, then they should be upset. Like, no, I'm not going to do it. And so, it's not. So when the reason we're pro-life is not because we want to take women's rights away. That's a logical fallacy of itself. That's not the reason we're pro-life. We're pro-life because we don't like seeing innocent human beings murdered, right? And so, and I know a lot of times I've said that, and then people will say, "Well, what about immigration and all this other stuff?" Listen, we're going to get to that, all right? We'll get there. We're doing a whole series on it, so we'll get to immigration pretty soon and talk about that some more. But and then war and stuff like that, we'll talk about a little bit as well, I believe. But it's on the docket. But so, anyways, I don't know that there's really. There's definitely some more arguments and stuff that we could probably go through. But it's really to be a pro-life person and to defend it well, you have to defend the fact that personhood begins at conception. So Christian, I don't know if you had anything to add there, but if you want to get into what the actual scientific data is for a development of the fetus, that'd be cool.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And I was thinking about the vasectomy thing, and I'm like, one, it's two guys, so y'all can't procreate to do anything anyway. But I guess that's besides the point. And they're about choice, but if we can prove the personhood, then that person also has rights. And no, they can't fight for their own rights at that point, but that's why Christians are to stand up for this moral decision, because these babies have rights just as much as this other person, but they can't be represented for it. So,
and just to clarify that, the vasectomy thing, I think that was from the perspective of a female whose spouse or whatever was getting a vasectomy. Yeah,
well, that would change it. They said my partner, and I'm like, that's interesting. Yeah. So as far as development, 18 days after the conception. So the heart is pumping 21 days after it is beating and pumping blood through the body. So a function that is one of our daily happenings that we don't have to think about is happening 21 days after conception. And so that's just 3 weeks after the point of conception. And most women do not know they are pregnant by this point, or they had just found out. Like, it's early on. First ultrasounds are given within 4 weeks. So at this point, their heart's already beating. The ultrasound has not been given. The body parts are formed within the first couple of months of being pregnant. The brain is formed within the first 40 days. So I guess you could get rational beings. 10 days after it is formed, the brain waves can be recorded. So within 50 days, brain waves are happening. And so rationality is being developed. By 42 days, the brain is controlling the movement of muscles and organs. In 12 weeks, the baby is kicking, opening his mouth, bending wrists, making a fist, etc. So a pretty cool thing, Randy Alcorn, he has a book called Pro-Life Answers to Pro-Choice Arguments. He says the unborn's brain sends a message to his own pituitary gland, which in turn stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete hormones, which stimulates the mother's uterus to contract. The woman goes into labor not because her body is ready to surrender the unborn child, but because the unborn child is ready to leave her body. And so just this point can prove, especially personhood up into the point of birth, so that they definitely, I don't think, can say viability up until this point, just because of this very thing that happens. And then there's a book called The Moral Case for Abortion. It says the premature baby at 23 weeks is indeed no different from the fetuses, except that its life is supposed by a machine's system, not its mother's womb. So even there, when they're born early, like we talked about the boy being born at 21 weeks, so 23 weeks, it's being developed on a machine when it's born. So there's so many babies in the NICU now that can be pretty much developed right on this machine. And so it's not that they're not a person, they just need help developing. And we have the medical technology where at that point they are viable, they will live. They have a heartbeat, they have everything that they need. And so it's cool to look at the biology and have this backing to help these pro-life arguments just stand, where this baby is alive and they are moving. I've got 28 days, they're budding arms and legs. So just 4 weeks in, you can tell the baby is alive. 35 days, mouth, ears, and nose are taking shape. And so we can see that the baby is alive. It's moving. It looks just like us, just a miniature version. I mean, everything is there to point to viability and personhood. All we have to do is just look at it. So do you have any other points on the development of the fetus, Jonathan?
Just this one. I think you covered it very well. I was interested. I wonder when most abortions happen. Washington Post records that in 2019 that most abortions happen between 0 to 9 weeks. Right. So most people, when they get pregnant and they realize they're pregnant, it's because they've the woman's missed her period. And so then they're like, crap, or whatever, maybe not they say crap, but every time. But they're going to say, oh, man, I might be pregnant. And so usually that's, 4 weeks at least. And so then you may go to the doctor, and then for everything to happen and the process to happen, I mean, you're talking about 6 weeks. So think about it. Even at 6 weeks, 18 days after conception, the heart is forming. 21 days after, it is beating and pumping blood throughout the body. So there is a beating heart. That's why you hear about heartbeat bills in some states, because the heart you can actually hear the heartbeat at 6 weeks, which is around the time when most abortions are happening. And there's an actual heartbeat in this baby. Usually you get an ultrasound by then, so you can actually see it. That's why a lot of what do they call? What do we call them, Christian? The pro life places, pregnancy centers. That's why a lot of pregnancy centers are really putting money into ultrasound machines and like 4D ultrasound, so that these women can see, hey, listen, this is what is growing inside of you. Like, look how amazing this is. And so, so by the time this happens, you also got the brain is formed, and there's brain waves that can be recorded. That in like by 42 days, like he said, the brain's controlling movement of muscles and organs. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are happening when most abortions are happening, and you literally have to completely ignore all of that to convince yourself that the abortion that I'm having is not a murder of a child. You have to completely ignore all that, because if you don't, if you have a conscience at all, you're gonna be like, man, I'm a murderer. I'm a murderer, and we'll get into that some more here in just a minute. Just some of the stories and things we've heard from people, but let's talk about. I mean, we've kind of defended pro-life as we've talked about pro-choice arguments. But let's talk about a few pro-life arguments. So obviously one is conception starts at birth, because instantly DNA is starting to form. Scientifically, DNA is starting to form instantly. And so I would say, and of course the Bible speaks on it so many times that conception starts at birth, and of course, I get it. Not everybody that's concerned about this topic is going to trust the Bible, and not everybody concerned about this topic believes in God. But I think that's a big, huge part of it, because I'm kind of leaning on the guy, on the being that created everything, and this is what he says about children and about babies. So he sees God as human being, and when he sees them in Scripture, a lot of times he sees them with the future he has in store for them, with some of the prophets and different things like that. That's a pretty big deal. Another one is that, think about it. Think about a 2-year-old. Nobody would murder a 2-year-old, and we wouldn't expect, if a 2-year-old was murdered, we wouldn't expect that person to not receive justice. We would expect that person to be condemned and be convicted and be put in prison. What about your 98-year-old grandma who is not viable anymore, can't take care of herself? Is it okay to murder your 98-year-old grandma? Obviously not, right? Euthanasia is kind of another debated topic, but what about children with autism and special needs? Like, just because they have an issue, the baby might have an issue, is that really a good reason to murder a child? Obviously not. You see? And so it all goes back to, is the child at 2 years old the same as the child at 6 weeks in the womb? Is the child at 2 years old the same as 12 weeks in the womb, or 13 or 16 or 20? Right? And so, like Christian said, the youngest baby to survive is 21 weeks old. At 21 weeks, the fetus can survive and it can be vital outside of the womb. And I'm sure it's not, definitely wasn't an easy process. I don't know the whole story about that, but I'm sure it was an up and down battle through all that. But still, that just shows it is possible, and it shows that personhood, especially if you're talking about viability, can happen long before the baby is actually born. And I think the bottom line is, like me and Christian both, we say it all the time, this is not a political issue. And I really hate and am saddened by the fact that this has become a political issue, and that you almost have to be completely split on both sides. And I'm sure there are Democrats out there who are not are pro-choice. That there's probably Democrats out there who are pro-life. And, and I would say most of the people I talk to probably wouldn't get an abortion themselves. They just don't want somebody else telling them whether or not they can do it. But I view it as, we tell people that it is illegal to murder another human being, unless it's in an act of like self-defense or something like that. But, we tell people, we command that it is illegal to commit murder. And so, yeah, I don't have a problem in supporting laws that tell people it is not okay to murder innocent human beings. I have no problem enforcing a law and supporting a law that says that. So I just it seems so clear to me. And when I talk to people, I understand. Like, I have a really good friend of mine, and I won't say his name just because I haven't really checked with him to make sure I could say his name. So, but I've got a friend of mine, and he's got a couple of daughters, and he said, it really would break my heart for my daughter to have some kind of medical issue to where if she did not abort her baby, she would die. And that if she went through with the pregnancy, that it would be likely that her and the baby would both die. And I hear it, man. I hear it. I can empathize with that. But then again, just because it just doesn't add up. Because when we're talking about murder, that's what I hate it when people start getting away from that, because they know that if you start connecting it with murder, obviously you're going to have to shy away from. Obviously, you're going to have to be pro-life. When you start connecting it with murder, when you start giving personhood to the fetus, you're going to have to connect the two, and so that's what I keep going back to. It's if it is murder, if we could agree that a fetus has the characteristics of personhood, then this should not be a question of, or this shouldn't even be an issue of, hey, should we be allowed to have an abortion? This shouldn't even be the issue. The issue should be, how can we as a country, how can we as Christians, how can we as churches, how can we help support and guide and direct and be there for women who are going through pregnancy? Like if a woman is raped, I've talked to people who have been raped, right? Men and women. I've talked to people who have been raped, and it is a sad and traumatic, and it's hard to even hear it. I can't even imagine what it was like for these people to go through it. And I could imagine that, when you have a traumatic experience, a lot of times you get these triggers will pop up in your life, and you get PTSD. Same thing for guys like in the military, you get PTSD. And so I can't even imagine having a constant trigger being with you throughout the entire pregnancy, and then having to, especially if you went through the tough route of taking care of that kid yourself, to have that trigger throughout the rest of your life. And so my thoughts, though, are not like, hey, we need to make it where it's okay for this woman to murder this child. No, I think we need to put our money and put our finances, put our support towards making sure they get help. Because, man, I've also heard stories, as I've been involved with some pregnancy centers. I actually helped build a closet in one, but kind of a weird story, but helped build a huge closet in a pregnancy center. But I've heard these stories of how these women will come in there that have had abortions. And maybe you're listening to this and you're like, you know what, I'm really considering, should I have an abortion or not? Is it wrong or not? I can just tell you, man, I've heard so many stories from women who have had abortions that are just heartbroken for years and for the rest of their lives. And they're just like, wow, I murdered my child. And that's the thought that sits with them for the rest of their lives. And like I said, I've talked to people who've had miscarriages. And I know at the pregnancy center, a lot of times what they'll do is, for people who have already had abortions, they also try to help them. They don't just help help the women who are pregnant, or couples and men. They'll help men too, because men struggle with it. But they try to be there for them. They have this almost like the one I worked with. They had a birthday, almost like a birthday celebration. Yeah, I thought it was really neat. Just once a year, they just remember this child, and remember that this child's in God's hands. And it's amazing what they can do. But I'm telling you, and it's the same thing when we get to sexuality, like allowing this stuff to happen, and allowing some of these laws that are going to take place. That most of these laws that are about to be passed are going to allow underage children to have abortions without their parents even knowing about it. And I'm like, man, like the emotional turmoil that can come from that for the rest of their lives. I mean, that's just like if a kid messed up and went and just, hit somebody with a bat and accidentally killed him or something. Like the emotional turmoil you could have for the rest of your life because of a decision that you can make, and that it can be so easy and easily accessible if these laws get passed is just so sick to me. And it's like to me, it seems like there's a war on our children and a war on the youth and a war on, I think it's a war against women, and from the pro-choice side, not the pro-life side. But I don't know, Christian, you're going to have to stop me, man. You're going to have to jump in here because what are your thoughts, man?
I mean, I'm right along with you. It's sad, and you can see it throughout. I mean, they're going to figure out any way to almost have pride. Like, even at the root of it, you can tell it's pride. Like, we want to make our own decisions. We want to be in control. And from the moment in the garden, that has always been the sin nature. That has always been our trouble, is that we want to be in charge. We want to be in control. And like you said, they probably don't know it at the point when they have this abortion. But the amount of turmoil, the amount of regret, guilt, shame that comes from it is going to be astronomical, and more than any human would ever have to hold by themselves. Like, you can see that healing and therapy from these different things is usually from Christ. It's from that human perspective. Like you said, it gives us being pro-life also gives the church some responsibilities that they have to hold up to. And I don't think we've got too much time to get into all of those, but there is a flip side to this. If we're going to hold up this part of what God says, we've got to hold up everything where it says to take care of the orphans and the widows in their times of trouble. And so that's just another command we have. But we've got some verses down here also that we look at the scripture and what does this say? What does this have to say with abortion and the personhood of the child? One of the main texts, you hear it almost every year. There's one Sunday every year, which is the pro-life Sunday, or the Sanctity of Life Sunday. That's what they call it. Psalm 139, if you look at verses 13 through 16, it says, "For it was you who created my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you because I have been remarkably and wondrously made. Your works are wondrous, and I know this very well. My bones were not hidden from you when I was made in secret, when I was formed in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw me when I was formless. All my days were written in your book and planned before a single one of them began." And then another one, Job 3:3, "Let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night was said, a boy is conceived." And so you see that God specifically knit us together from the point of conception in our mother's womb, and he already planned everything that we were going to do. He knew the secrets. He knew what we were going to do. And then in Job, it says a boy is conceived. So at that point, that's already a person. We have a boy and a girl that shows personhood, shows viability. You want to look at the couple other verses we got, Jonathan?
Yeah, you just stopped with Job, right?
Yeah.
So Isaiah 49:1, when Isaiah is called into his when Isaiah is called to be a prophet, he says, "The Lord called me from the womb, from the body of my mother, he named me." I mean, it's just, you see it time and time again throughout Scripture. There is personhood given to the child in the womb, and this portion of the podcast is specifically for Christians, because I know Christians struggle with this. I know Christians are probably afraid to really talk about this in church because they're afraid of how their questions are going to be received. And that goes for a lot of things, but that's a different topic for a different day of why we can't ask questions in church. But listen, the Bible is clear. Like even in Genesis, it talks about how, in Genesis 1:27, it says, God made man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Uh, you know, God made mankind in his image. And in James, he reminds us when we're talking about, when we're talking to people and the words that we say to people, it's like, man, we're cursing people. James reminds us we're cursing people who are made in the image of God, and so that same thing goes for the fetus. The same thing goes for the baby in the womb. Is these are humans created in the image of God. That's important, and that's something that we really need to stand against. That's why we need to stand against abortion, because it just is a detriment. It's just a terrible slander on the image of God when we treat something like a fetus, and when we treat this baby like it's not a person, is a slander to the image of God. And then also you see again in when John the Baptist, when his mother Elizabeth finds out that Mary is pregnant with Jesus, and she says the baby just leaped in my womb, and if you've been pregnant, or you've known somebody that was, that's possible. Like a baby can move around and kick and all kinds of stuff. And obviously there was something supernatural going on between John and Jesus, but still, like that shows the personhood of the baby in the womb. And of course that baby was 6 months old, but I don't think it really changes much of the argument. I'm glad you did mention you had just mentioned now my mind's going blank. You mentioned about foster care and adoption and stuff. That's another argument that comes. I think it's when they I gotta go back and memorize all these logical fallacies, because you hear them a lot and it's hard to call them out when you don't remember what the fallacy's called. But when you try to sway off the topic, because when people start getting insecure and in debate, what they'll do is they'll change from the topic you're actually talking about to a different topic. And so people do this all the time when you're talking about abortion, because they know, I think everybody knows, that pro-life people have a very strong argument for the personhood of the baby, because they know if they really put their thoughts together, they have no argument that the fetus is not a person. It does not have personhood characteristics, because if they continue on with their line of reasoning, then they can also say, like we said earlier, that a 2-year-old doesn't have the characteristics of personhood that they would come up with. But anyways, we've already jumped on that train. But so that is another argument that they throw in there. But then again, that's where our focus should be on. Is we've got a problem. We've got a problem in our foster care, in our adoption care, and different things like that. We've got a major problem. But killing babies is not the solution to that problem. And it's very clear. It is not the solution to that problem. And so I know we're been on here for a while, but I just want to talk about. I do want to share this. I definitely want to share this. This is this kind of made me tear up a little bit. So this is an article on Planned Parenthood's website. The article is entitled "My Abortion Was an Act of Love." My abortion was an act of love. And I was like, what in the world? And so I just want to read you a couple quotes from somebody who ended up getting an abortion. So this girl finds out she's pregnant. She finds out she's pregnant, and she goes to the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, is this a good thing that you're pregnant? And it kind of throws her off. She's like, I don't know. But listen to what she says. Being pregnant, when she just found out she's pregnant, this is what she says. When I left the clinic, I sat in my car in silence and stillness. Then the emotions came flooding in. I couldn't believe that I felt so much deep, indescribable love for this little being growing inside of me. It was so scary. Even now, I struggle to describe how it felt. It was love, though a very specific kind of love, a kind of love that I had never felt before and haven't felt since. And she's like, I had no idea what to make of it. The thought of having to try to communicate all that I was feeling to my partner terrified me. And so she talks about how she struggled about whether or not she should get an abortion. But you see, she felt it. She felt the deep love and commitment. And long story short, she ends up going back. She ends up going back and getting an abortion. Let me see if I can find the quote. She said in that moment, when her and her significant other were trying to figure out if they were ready to have a baby, which honestly, by this point in the pro-life view, it's too late. You know, there is no debate whether or not you're ready. You're having a baby. And you should, you know, I know it's going to be scary and it's terrifying. I mean, I feel like I was kind of prepared for having a baby and it was still terrifying. So, but she said in that moment, as painful as it was, I knew the most loving thing I could do for this baby was not have it. Listen to what she's saying. She's giving personhood characteristics to the baby that is in her own womb. And so I'm tearing up because I'm like, this girl doesn't realize the emotional impact she's had on herself and her significant other. Like, she felt it. She knew in her heart, she knew in her mind, she knew there is a living human being that I have deep, indescribable love for. And so she ends up going through with the abortion. And then she says this. She says, I walked into Planned Parenthood, looked around, and immediately felt safe. I filled out some paperwork in the waiting room. I read something that stuck with me to this day. Listen to this. Most women feel relieved after an abortion, though some women feel distressing emotions such as regret and depression, just as some women feel these emotions after having a baby. If you feel these emotions, please reach out to the services available to you. Even in something as mundane and routine as medical paperwork, Planned Parenthood made me feel seen, understood, and supported. You see, what I'm trying to point out in this story is that she knew, she had it in her heart that there was some indescribable love she had for whatever this was growing inside of her. She had an indescribable love for it. The reason she decided to get an abortion because her and her significant other were not ready. Listen, it's not that hard. You want to know the best way to not have a baby? Is to not have unprotected sex, okay? It's not that hard. And once you are pregnant, there is no conversation anymore to have. Like, if somebody comes into my office, you know, I'm a youth pastor. If youth comes into my office and said, Pastor Jonathan, like, I don't know what to do. I'm considering an abortion. Like, I just found out I'm pregnant and I have no idea what to do. My parents are going to kill me. They're going to throw me out on the street. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. It's going to ruin my life. I'm like, listen, my goal at that point is not to help them figure out whether or not they should have an abortion. My goal at that point is to say, what can I do as a youth pastor? What can my church do as the church to help through this pregnancy? And so it really just, it really upsets me to see how this can happen, you know? And, you know, a conversation about, you know, medical emergencies and things like that. And when would it be okay for maybe an abortion to take place? If the mother and baby were both about to die and you needed an abortion to at least save the mother, even though the baby's going to die either way, you know, that's a tough conversation, but I would much rather the conversation be shifting there. And I'd much rather that conversation be shifting once we see the statistics change. Because right now, 74% of all abortions happen because of people not being ready to have a baby. And that murder, for some reason, they think is a viable option. So I say all that to say this. I really think that this is hurting our country. It's hurting people more than ever, more than people realize, I think, the damage that this does to people. And man, I just think about somebody who, what if it clicks in their head one day that, wow, this is, I think I murdered a child. You know, so maybe if you're watching this, listen, I'll tell you right now, if you're watching this and you're like, I've had an abortion and I've been wondering and been struggling with the fact that I really think that, I think maybe you're right. Maybe this was a person inside of me. Listen, reach out to us. We'll try to help you out. Maybe get you connected with somebody that can help you out. You know, because you probably need to have some counseling with that, and you need to have some godly counseling, especially if you're a Christian. But even if you're not, I think godly counseling would help you. So, anyways, I mean, Christian, did you have anything to add before we get into these states? I definitely want to talk about at least some of these state laws coming up.
I think you're good, and there's forgiveness and room at the cross for those who have had an abortion. Like it's not a point. Of course, we know that those babies are in God's hands. And they're in heaven, and you will be able to see them one day. But there's still forgiveness, and God will still accept you if you seek after Him. So that's just the point. But now we got our ballots and laws to get into.
Yeah. And one more thing too, I didn't really mention is, a lot of times we do focus on the women, but I've heard story after story of some of these pregnancy centers where men come in there too. They're like, I begged and begged and begged for her to go through with this pregnancy, and she wouldn't do it. And she aborted my child. And sometimes the husband or the significant other or whatever is just completely disconnected from her, but still struggling with it. So also, man, listen, if that's you, like, reach out, man. I think both of us me and Christian both are good listening ears. So hopefully we could kind of point you in the right direction. So, but yeah, let's do it, man. Let's get into these laws. I know both of us have kind of looked at. I came across this because I had heard. That's why we wanted to do this before the November election, because I started hearing rumors that there's going to be some laws, and I started thinking about it. And I said, well, yeah. After Roe v. Wade was overturned, this is our first major voting time. So I would imagine there's a lot of states are going to have some laws being passed during this time. So right now we know of seven or eight, but Florida, Arizona, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, and South Dakota are for sure. They're going to have some kind of law on their ballots. And short answer is you can kind of answer. You should, if you're pro-life, you should answer no. You should put no for all of them because all of them are pro-choice laws, and they're there to protect abortion rather than to stop it. So, Christian, you want to explain that a little bit more? I've actually got it here. I've got the Florida one.
Yeah.
So the Florida one is titled "Amendment to Limit Government Interference with Abortion." So that's what you'll see at the top. The full text. Now, this could change by then. I don't know how much it will, but it should be pretty similar to this. But the full text will say, "Limiting government interference with abortion, except as provided in Article 10, Section 22, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability, or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's health care provider." And so this could open up for abortions to happen more often, and it could open up for it can also open up for underage children to even be able to have abortions without actually getting consent from their parents. It's actually there's a chance that, because I didn't know this, but you can actually have an abortion via telehealth, where you can actually meet with somebody on telehealth. They'll send a prescription pill, and it's basically an abortion pill that you would take that would kind of medically induce or medically do the abortion. But so even that is something that some people are doing. And so voting no, it would push it further. So anybody who's pro-life, you definitely want to vote no, not just for the Florida one, but all the other ones too. It seems like, though, I've read through all of them, it seems like the Florida one is the most confusing. And I'm fairly certain that it was intentional, how confusing it is. With the term viability, I think, is the main term. Because some people, viability, like we talked about, is so ambiguous that it can mean all kinds of different things. And so just make sure, though, that when you get to your ballot, that you're voting no against this law. And then any of the other states, Georgia doesn't have anything. Doesn't seem like they even have anything on the docket. Like, there's probably no possibility Georgia's going to have anything. So a couple of websites to kind of keep up with this, just in case it changes, because it's August 20th when we're recording this. And so this could change by November, of course. So, but abortionballot.com, I'll try to make sure I put this into the description as well. And then there's also a ballot tracker you can look up. on what's that website called? Let me see. kff.org. Ballot tracker. So that'll kind of help you kind of keep track of all the ballot information. And I'm sure that probably has more than just the abortion stuff, but it'll be on there as well. So you definitely want to keep up with it. Even the Florida one, it could change. I mean, they could change the wording, but I don't think it's gonna. At this point, I don't think it'll change. Like whether you should vote yes or no towards it. I think it's pretty safe to say that you should go ahead and vote no towards this amendment to limit government interference with abortion. So. And if this happens, let's say we lose this battle, right? For one, it can be appealed, and I'm sure bigger organizations will try to appeal it, do everything they can to appeal it. But I mean, no matter what, like right now, people could still travel from one state, which is happening a lot. People are traveling from states where it's banned to states where it's not, and still having abortion. So we got to continue the conversation with people. And we've got to continue to be there for those going through pregnancy, because that's going to be a huge part of all of this. But so yeah, Christian, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think with the laws, most of their terms are ambiguous and kind of doesn't give you a direct answer, and that's on purpose, so they can pretty much use it any way they want to have an abortion. Like, they talk about the patient's health determined by the patient's healthcare provider, and I've seen explanations of it that can be anything from physical health, like they are going to die if they go through with this pregnancy, but it can also be emotional, like they're just having a really hard time emotionally with this pregnancy, and they can convince the doctor to go through with abortion. It can be financial, like they can't afford it, and so they could have an abortion. And so all of these things are pretty much across the board. And so if you boil it down to it, they're trying to pass abortion for 9 months of pregnancy up to the point of conception, because that's when they look at viability oftentimes. And so easiest answer, just vote no.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if they pass that law, then like I said, it's going to open up doors for there to be a lot of debate among doctors and stuff about when does viability begin or end, I guess. Right? No, viability would begin.
Yeah.
So yeah, we probably should start wrapping this up, Christian. What's your closing thoughts?
I mean, if you can't and want further discussion on just when personhood begins, viability, just reach out to us. But I think you've got enough information here, and we've gone through the different amendments that you can make an informed decision on whether to vote these amendments through, whether to be pro-life or pro-choice. And I think at the end of the day, you really can't make an argument to be pro-choice and be a Christian. It's a hard road to do, especially on this end. So the biblical worldview is to be pro-life. And so we need to speak up, and we need to stand firm on what our beliefs in. No matter what passes in your state or what doesn't pass, you need to do your part and do your duty of voting, but also to stand firm on what God's word says, no matter what the topic may be.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I know Christians that struggle with it, and what they'll say is, I wouldn't have an abortion, and I'm pro-life, because and they'll even say, I think it's murder, but they also will say, but I also don't want to tell somebody else what to do. And listen, that is not good enough. It's not good enough. The same, like we talked about, the same way if I said, well, this guy, he really irritates me, so I'm going to kill him. Well, you say, well, you can't do that. I'm going to tell you can't do that. I'm going to tell you with authority by the law that you cannot just kill somebody because they irritate you. That's, and I mean, I'm not saying a baby irritates or whatever, but I'm just saying it's the same logic. And so I get the struggle, but listen, if you're a Christian, the Bible's clear, the science is clear, the philosophy is clear, that personhood starts at conception. And that about the time when most abortions are happening, that it is fairly obvious that the baby is a person, has the characteristics of personhood. And like I've said, I just want to reiterate it because I hope you see our heart too. Like, our heart is not here we're not here to win an argument. We're here to help push people in the right direction, and to honor God and to honor life, honor the sanctity of life. And, that's our goal. And so listen, if you're struggling, if you need help, man, reach out, find a pregnancy center, reach out to some churches. And listen, I know how it is in church. You're saying, if you have a baby and you're pregnant and you're not married, I understand the pressures of it in church. But talk to some trusted people. I mean, most pastors I know are so trustworthy that, man, there's sometimes they can kind of keep it under wraps with you, and just because they want to help you out. And I know from my position, I know from Christian's position, as we're both youth pastors, and haven't had any youth that have come through my group that got pregnant in their teen years. I've had some that kind of got scared and thought they were pregnant, but there's no way we're going to just sit back and just let them suffer. And we're going to do everything we can. And I had somebody really close to me ask me one time, they said, Jonathan, would you be mad at me if I had an abortion? Would you hate me if I had an abortion? And I said, well, first of all, there's nothing you could do to get me to hate you. I said, second of all, I would be upset. Not necessarily, I mean, I'd be upset because you had an abortion, but I'd be upset that you feel like you couldn't come to me for help because of it, So I know that's a lot of Christians' hearts. I know there's a lot of people that are like, this want to argue and yell or whatever, but I can tell you the heart of most Christians is they want to help. And we believe in the value of life. We support the value of life, and we think that it is beyond a reasonable doubt that personhood begins at conception. And so where do we go from here? Listen, Christians, keep the fight going. Roe v. Wade getting overturned was just the beginning, and it's going to be a continuous battle. Even if every state tomorrow banned abortion in every single state, it's going to be a continuous battle. So don't give up. Keep talking. One of the things you could do is say, if you got somebody that's a pro-choice person, say, hey, listen, there's this podcast the Grace Bond Ministries did, and they talked about it. Why don't you watch it? I'll watch it. And then let's come together and discuss it, So just do your best to keep the conversations going. These are conversations worth having. All right. Even if it's going to cause some disunity, these are conversations worth having. There's some things that aren't worth disunifying over, but these are definitely worth it. And listen, preachers, man, I got a lot of preacher friends. I got a lot of youth pastor friends, and listen, we got to stand firm. We got to stand firm on this issue, and we need to equip our people, the people that we care for, the people we shepherd. We need to share with them the truth. We need to share with them what God says about this topic, and continue to defend the unborn child. All right. So anyways, my closing thoughts are always longer than Christians because I talk way more. But yeah, we thank you guys for tuning in. If you made it through this whole thing, especially, man, if you made it through this whole thing and you're pro-choice, man, thank you. Like, that really means a lot. That really means a lot that you would be willing to sit through and listen to this, and to be honest with it, because I would imagine if you do and you're pro-choice, that you're probably a friend of one of ours, and you were really wanting to just out of respect for us, just to hear our points of views and stuff. So really, thank you for that. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Love to have some one-on-ones. Email us, gracebondministries@gmail.com. We continue the conversation. And I can't remember what we decided on next, Christian. I don't remember what our next podcast was going to be. I had to check our notes here. Was it immigration we were going to do next? um, abortion, homosexuality. So we'll just get the two most controversial ones right off the bat. So we're not just going to talk about homosexuality. We're going to talk about sexuality in general, because it used to be, I would say, probably 10 years ago, I feel like you probably could have just said, let's just talk about homosexuality. But now you got to talk about the transgender issues and all that kind of thing too. So, yeah, that's going to be our next topic. So listen, thank you guys for tuning in. Reach out to us, and we will see you guys on the next podcast. God bless.
Thank you so much for watching the Grace Bond Ministries podcast or listening to the podcast. I know there's various ways that you could be listening to this right now or watching this right now, but I just want to say thank you so much. And if you would, wherever you're listening, if you're listening on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Podcast, please leave a 5-star review and write a little thing in there. If you're on Facebook, leave a comment. Let me know how this impacted you, or even any other questions or comments or concerns you may have. And also, if you have an idea or you have something you'd really want to talk more deeply about, you can always email me at gracebondministries@gmail.com. But thank you so much. Remember, for it is by grace you are saved through faith, and not of yourselves, for it is the gift of God. Thank you for listening to Grace Bond Ministries.